I always tell people there is no wrong path in terms of learning. As long as you start learning, it doesn't matter what you start learning. Start learning whatever you're interested in, and that will get you down a good path.
Welcome to Sidecar Sync, your weekly dose of innovation. If you're looking for the latest news, insights, and developments in the association world, especially those driven by artificial intelligence, you're in the right place. We cut through the noise to bring you the most relevant updates with a keen focus on how AI and other emerging technologies are shaping the future. No fluff, just facts and informed discussions. I'm Amith Nagarajan, chairman of Blue Cypress, and I'm your host.
Greetings and welcome back to the Sidecar Sync. We are excited to be back with you again for another fun and action-packed episode of the Sidecar Sync. My name is Amith Nagarajan, and I'm your host.
And my name is Mallory Mejias, and I run Sidecar.
And we are excited to get going. We are going to run through some really exciting topics at the intersection of artificial intelligence and AI, as usual. But before we do that, let's take a moment to hear from our sponsor.
Today's sponsor is Sidecar's AI Learning Hub. The AI Learning Hub is your go-to place to sharpen your AI skills and ensure you're keeping up with the latest in the AI space. When you purchase access to the AI Learning Hub, you get a library of on-demand AI lessons that are regularly updated to reflect what's new and the latest in the AI space. You also get access to live weekly office hours with AI experts. And finally, you get to join a community of fellow AI enthusiasts who are just as excited about learning about this emerging technology as you are. You can purchase 12-month access to the AI Learning Hub for $399. And if you want to get more information on that, you can go to sidecarglobal.com/hub. Amith, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing really well. You know, it's another busy week, a lot going on in the world, and I was out of the office for a good bit of last week, so I'm still looking for that AI that will eliminate my inbox entirely upon my return, but haven't found that tool yet, but doing pretty well. How about yourself?
Yep, it's indeed been a busy one. Last week, I was actually at the Blue Cypress Family of Companies Innovation Hub in Chicago. We had a fantastic event. I got to lead a marketing AI panel, which was really exciting for me. And we are doing it all over again, Amith, next week in DC. And you'll be there, right?
I will. Yeah, I was bummed to not be able to join in Chicago last week, but I'm looking forward to being there. It's a week from today. Today's Tuesday, the 7th of May, that we're recording this episode. And on Tuesday, May 14th, we will be in DC, and looking forward to welcoming a really nice sized group of association folks into the DC event. It's going to be a lot of fun.
And I believe we still have a few spots left at that event. If you are in DC and you're interested, we'll drop the link in the show notes, but you can find more information at bluecypress.io. And we have another exciting announcement. We have officially launched Fan Mail with the Sidecar Sync podcast. If you are listening on mobile right now, you can go to the show notes of this episode and you will see a link that says something like send a text message. If you click that link, you can actually text the show directly from your phone. Let us know if you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, challenges. We are really looking forward to getting some fan mail, so don't hesitate to reach out.
And Mallory and I will actually read any messages you send. We might run them through AI as well, but we will definitely read whatever you send us.
I will read them all. Amith might run them through AI. We'll see how many we get. That's a fair bet. Today, we have a few topics lined up. First, we're talking about Microsoft's new AI model called MAI-1. Then we will be talking about Google's nonprofit generative AI report. And finally, we're talking about Randy Travis, a country singer. I won't tell you exactly what just yet, but stay tuned if you want to know how that relates to AI. First topic, Microsoft is preparing to launch a new in-house AI model named MAI-1, making a significant step in its efforts to compete with leading AI developers like Google, Anthropic, and even OpenAI. This move comes after Microsoft's substantial investment in OpenAI, exceeding $10 billion, which granted Microsoft the rights to utilize OpenAI's models. The development of MAI-1 is under the supervision of Mustafa Suleyman, a former Google AI leader who recently served as CEO of the AI startup Inflection. As a reminder, Microsoft acquired a majority of Inflection's staff and paid $650 million for the rights to its intellectual property back in March. It's important to note that MAI-1 is a Microsoft project and not a continuation of Inflection's work, although it may leverage training data and technology from the startup. The new model is set to be a leap forward in terms of size and complexity compared to Microsoft's previous, smaller open source models. It will require significantly more computing power and training data, and it will thus be more costly. The model is expected to have approximately 500 billion parameters. For context, OpenAI's GPT-4 boasts over 1 trillion parameters, while smaller models from companies like Meta and Mistral have around 70 billion parameters. Microsoft's development of MAI-1 underscores the company's ambition to remain at the forefront of AI technology, competing with the biggest names in the industry. So, Amith, I'm sure our listeners like me immediately have the same question, which is why would Microsoft want to compete with OpenAI when they've already made a $10 billion investment in OpenAI?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's so much to unpack on this topic. I think this would be the biggest chunk of the pod today because there's just so much to talk about. That particular question is going to be top of mind for a lot of people. So Microsoft is very well known to be highly aligned with OpenAI. They've invested $1 billion in OpenAI and subsequently $10 billion, so $11 billion in total over the course of a couple of years. And it's an important asset to them. OpenAI is the leader still in terms of frontier models. GPT-4 still is top of the charts in terms of its capabilities, although not by a large margin. But this is too big of a prize for Microsoft to rely on an outside company it doesn't have full control over. They want to throw a lot more money and a lot more energy and have a lot more degrees of freedom than OpenAI will allow them. OpenAI is independent of Microsoft, even though Microsoft can heavily influence OpenAI. Also, Microsoft wants to have more direct control, independent of the percentage of ownership. That's not what it's about as much as it is Microsoft doing whatever they please. The models themselves are a function of data and money. So if you have processing power, which you need a lot of money for, and if you have the right data, obviously you have to have the right engineering talent, you can put together a pretty powerful model with the current architectures that are out there. And Mustafa is someone, of course, who's been at the center of AI for a very long time, coming from the Google and DeepMind background, having formed Inflection, which was behind the Pi personal assistant that Microsoft acquired. They didn't buy the company for the tech. They bought it for Mustafa and his team of researchers to do exactly this. So this was no surprise. It was a little bit surprising that Microsoft just swallowed Inflection when they did, but not really, honestly, that surprising because they were kind of like the one company that was out there that made sense to do that with. So digging a little bit more into like why they would do this, there's a lot of room for improvement in this world, and they don't want to have themselves hitched just to one potential model or model family with OpenAI. And OpenAI is likely to be a major player in this space for a long time. Microsoft will probably keep putting a lot more money into OpenAI, but Microsoft, this is too big of a deal for Microsoft to allow their destiny to be controlled by one fairly small company. Remember, Microsoft's a $3 trillion market cap company. A $10 billion investment is frankly a rounding error to them. It represents, less than an eighth of their annual profit. It is not that big of a number to Microsoft. What is a lot bigger number to Microsoft is the growth potential they could have if they truly are the dominant AI player globally. And they're very well positioned, arguably best positioned to execute on an AI strategy. So to me, those are the major reasons why Microsoft would do this. I don't think this means there are any concerns about OpenAI. I think Microsoft's going to keep backing them, but expect them to be a major player directly here. And there's even though these models will likely directly compete, they may have differences where some are better for certain things and others are better for other things.
I think this is the prime business example of not putting all your eggs in one basket, it sounds like. And I don't know if you saw this, Amith, but I saw this on LinkedIn earlier today, actually, a quote from Sam Altman saying something like, what you see in ChatGPT now is embarrassing. Did you see that quote?
Yeah, Sam's been saying stuff like that for a while, though. He tends to be kind of take that tone in all of his interviews, saying that actually ChatGPT and GPT-4 is pretty lousy, pretty embarrassing, mildly embarrassing, or slightly embarrassing, I think is his most recent quote. So that's reflective of both kind of foreshadowing what they're about to unveil, which no one knows exactly what that is or what it's going to be called, but we all expect something quite remarkable to be coming from them in the near future. Or they're not going to be the leader for very long, right? So that's part of it. The other part of it is kind of the attitude of the leader in the space, wanting to say, yeah, what you see is great, and we're still better than everyone, but it's still crap, basically. Whereas, everyone else is trying to catch them and still hasn't caught up to GPT-4. So there's some attitude packed into that. There's some foreshadowing of what's to come. And he's also right, because GPT-4 is not that great. It's amazing in so many ways, but it's also a toy in others.
Absolutely. I have fun critiquing GPT-4 all the time on this podcast. If Microsoft's new model, MAI-1, is the next best thing and awesome, do you think that Microsoft Copilot will start using its own models? And then if that's the case, what do you see happening to ChatGPT or GPT-4?
I think, it's directly competitive. When MAI-1 becomes available, assuming that it's even at parity with GPT-4, that will 100% be what Copilot will substitute in. It's simple economics. There's no payment that has to go to a third party. They own the model. They also would have a different environment in terms of licensing and data retention. And so some of the things that Microsoft has to kind of tap dance around with OpenAI, they have more degrees of freedom around, because OpenAI, again, has this particular charter in terms of the way they're structured, and they impose that upon a licensee like Microsoft. What that basically means is Microsoft has more control. You can consider that good if you're a Microsoft stockholder, but you could also consider that potentially to be concerning, which I think is true for everyone, right, in terms of the kind of data these companies are starting to gather at even more rapid paces. But Copilot, I would be shocked if 12 months from now it's still powered by GPT-4. I don't think it will matter to you, and I think it will get better, right? They're not going to take it backwards. In fact, if you think about Copilot, I've used it a fair bit, but honestly, I still go to ChatGPT and more Claude 3, the Claude family of models, because they're just better than Copilot. Part of it is kind of like, it has GPT-4 under the hood, but it's kind of watered down a little bit, because Microsoft has to serve so many hundreds of millions of users in parallel. And ChatGPT, it's the same thing in a sense, but that is the product, so they don't water it down quite to the same extent. I'm sure that they're using either quantized or some other optimization technique to make it possible to scale to the level that they've scaled it to. And so GPT-4 within Copilot is nowhere near as good as GPT-4 by itself. And I think they're looking to fix that.
I'm just thinking in the greater landscape, though, having Meta AI that we talked about recently powered by Llama, having, Google Workspace powered by Gemini, and Microsoft maybe eventually being powered by its own MAI-1 model. Where do we see these standalone models like GPT-4 or Claude? I mean, I still use them both actively, so I guess for the time being, nothing will happen, but kind of what do you see as the future for those standalone models?
I think there will be uses for both standalone tools like ChatGPT and Claude and others. There will certainly be very vibrant competition for that type of market, but you'll also see stronger and stronger embedded use cases like with Copilot. Those types of tools have a significant advantage for certain types of tasks. If you're working on a document, having the context of that document, but also having the context of lots of other documents you've written preloaded into that model is super valuable. So, the theory behind Copilot is it has access to the Microsoft Graph, which is essentially like all of the knowledge you store in SharePoint and OneDrive for you and for your organization. And therefore, in theory, it can contextualize what it does for you. In reality, you have to specify the documents that you actually want it to consider, and it's very limited to the extent that it can do that right now. So it's really not all that different from uploading a document to ChatGPT. There is a major difference in information security because you're already in the Microsoft environment. You're under Microsoft's licensing in terms of service. So by not going outside, you're not transferring data. So that's helpful. But it's not really much better right now. So I think over time, what has to happen is the inbuilt tools within particular software, within Excel, within PowerPoint, within Word, they're going to have a significant advantage living in that environment because they have access to data that other people don't. The flip side of it is, I think tools that are standalone probably will have certain advantages that have to do with user experience. They're probably going to keep innovating in ways that don't make sense when you're like an embedded tool within Word. To be determined. I think it's competition's a beautiful thing. It's going to shake out a lot of great ideas. I think, there will be standalone tools. It's my suspicion, at least for the next couple of years, but the tools that are in these places are going to become better and better.
At the Innovation Hub event last week in Chicago, I actually asked the panelists and the audience what their favorite models were. And by far and large, most people said ChatGPT is the tool that they go to most often. And then it was Claude, probably in second place. And no one else had really dabbled with any other models. But I'm sure the listeners can relate when I say that sometimes we have model fatigue. What do you think are the key pieces of information as individuals, as people who work at associations or nonprofits? When you hear about a new model coming out, what do you say, Amith, is the key info that we should know? Is it parameters or tokens? Is it whether it's open source versus closed source, or should we just know what it does for us? What do you think?
I think it depends on the circumstances and what you're trying to do. If you're an end user trying to achieve a ChatGPT type experience, then the size of the model probably matters a lot because the more sophisticated models tend to be larger. That's starting to change a little bit because like Llama 3. The 70 billion parameter model, which is 20 times smaller than GPT-4, is pretty close to GPT-4 in a lot of areas of language processing, conversational intelligence. It's pretty amazing, actually, what they've done. And that continues to be the case. The smaller models are getting very powerful, and the larger models are getting more powerful still. However, the question is, how much power do you need? So, it's like horsepower in a car. After a certain amount of engine power, like how much more do you need to get to go to the grocery store? If you're going to go race, which some people want to do, then maybe you need 500 horsepower instead of 300 horsepower. But if you're just like going to get groceries or pick up the kids or go to work, 200 horsepower, 300 horsepower is probably plenty, right? And so model size and power are roughly correlated right now, but that's starting to change. Continuing the engine analogy actually a little bit further, I don't know if you're a fan of plastic cars or not, Mallory. Are you a fan at all?
I can't say I'm a fan of plastic cars, but take it away.
And I kind of age myself by saying this, but like plastic cars to me are like 50s, 60s, maybe older, but nowadays the cars I grew up with that were new at the time are classics to some people. So that pisses me off a little bit, but that's an aside. But the point is that back in the 60s and 70s in particular, there was, until the oil embargo, there was a race to bigger and bigger and bigger engines. So the way you got faster cars was bigger engines. So you went from small block V8s to big block V8s, and you went from engines that had displacements of, 300 cubic inches, which is roughly 5.0 liters, all the way up to 400, 450, these kinds of massive engines that were 7, 8 liters and above in passenger vehicles, right? In kind of the muscle car era. And that's really how you got more power, is bigger and bigger displacement engine. That's kind of like the parameters in the model. You have these bigger, massive, and also very inefficient models right now. And what happens over time is the technology gets better. And in the 80s and then the 90s and more recently, you can get incredible amounts of power out of much, much smaller engines. My wife just got a car recently. She replaced her old car, and her new car has a 3-liter engine that produces 400 horsepower, which even back in the 90s, that would have taken a massive engine. So the point is that in a similar world, in a similar sense, I should say, these models are becoming bigger, but they're also getting condensed down, and the power is compacting in a way, and they're getting more efficient, getting smarter. So I think you're going to see that same type of thing evolve in a more aggressive way. And like what you get out of Llama 8 billion parameter version 3 is way better than what you got out of Llama's 70 billion parameter Llama 2. So 9 months, not even 9 months, and you have like a 10x reduction in size almost, and you have similar power between those two models. So anyway, I digress somewhat, but the point would be that yes, model size is relevant, but to the average end user, that's going to become kind of about as important as how closely you pay attention to the size of the engine in your car. It's going to be like, does it have the power? Does it get the mileage? What are the features of that model? Does it give you the outputs that you need to do your job? And we're going to reach a point where most of the use cases people are using right now for AI are going to be achievable across all the models. So the differentiation will be if you do more, like harder things, more reasoning, more planning, more complex types of work, then you're going to want the bigger and more powerful models. But there will also be scenarios where you want faster performance. And that's one of the areas where the small models are just brilliant. I recently, we had this video I posted on LinkedIn. One of our companies produces this AI tool called Skip. And Skip is basically like an interactive agent that lives inside a database and can like create reports and answer questions about your data all in a secure way. It's a really cool product. And Skip speed is super important. And so the team had run skip with Llama 3 on a tool called Grok, which we've talked about here, Grok with Q, the inference engine based on LPUs rather than GPUs, and it was 10x faster. And Llama 3 to begin with is quite fast. So it was like a nearly instant response time when you talk to it and ask questions about your data. It was pretty cool. We'll share that LinkedIn post in the show notes. But my point in sharing that is it's not all about power and size. Sometimes speed can be the advantage you really want. Think about like real-time voice translation applications where you want like instantaneous, no latency responses. You're going to need that for certain kinds of applications like real-time translation or real-time dubbing or whatever you want to do in that category.
Okay, so maybe keep in mind the size of the model, but also maybe in the future that might not correlate as much to power, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I think you're going to see models that are in the tens of billions of parameter power in the next, by the end of the year. I think you'll have like a model in the 10 to 30 billion parameter range that's as powerful as like GPT-3.5, which is, I think, 300 billion. You'll have models that are GPT-4 caliber that are in that 70, 80 billion parameter size. So they're going to keep shrinking and keep getting more powerful. What's exciting at the same time, of course, is what everyone wants, which is what's the GPT 4.5 or GPT-5 class of models, right? I'm not talking about OpenAI specifically, but across the board, what do those categories of models have in terms of new emerging capabilities? Do they have better reasoning, better planning, things like that? So those are the things we should look ahead for because they'll open up a new category of applications.
That makes sense. I must say, I've thought when you brought up the cars, you said plastic cars, Amith, and I was like, where is this conversation going? But you said plastic cars. I just had to, if you're listening closely, you probably heard me say plastic. I needed to clarify. Classic cars is what we're talking about. Moving on to topic 2, Google's nonprofit generative AI report. Google recently surveyed more than 4,000 organizations, nonprofit organizations, about how they're using generative AI in its Google for Nonprofits program. Here's what they learned. The survey revealed that 75% of nonprofits believe generative AI has the potential to significantly transform their marketing strategies. Despite the recognized potential, 2/3 of the nonprofits surveyed indicated that a lack of familiarity with generative AI technology is a major barrier to adoption. The report also points out that 40% of nonprofits do not have anyone in their organization educated in AI, which underscores the need for targeted training and resources to enable effective use of generative AI tools. Nonprofits that have started using generative AI tools have reported a 66% improvement in productivity. This report emphasizes that generative AI can help nonprofits to be more creative and effective in serving their communities. It also mentioned the launch of a $20 million Google.org accelerator program to fund nonprofits that are developing generative AI solutions, providing them with technical training and mentorship. Amith, I've seen productivity claims with AI range from probably 30 to 60%. I think 66% is on the higher end. Are you surprised to hear about that productivity boost with nonprofits specifically?
Not really. I think that, nonprofits they tend to be very information driven. And so when you're dealing with digital processes that are, and perhaps are a little bit outdated in some cases, there's more headroom or more opportunity. If you have an older process that's antiquated, AI can be kind of a faster jumpstart. So, if you're taking 10 hours to do something and you bring it down to 2, that's an 80% improvement. Maybe somebody else had already optimized a similar process from 10 to 4, and they went through 4 to 2, so they see a 50% improvement. So part of it's the absolute hours saved or improvement in output, but it doesn't surprise me a whole bunch. I'm excited. I was just in general super excited to read this report, and I think there's still headroom above that.
Given that AI is on an exponential curve, we talk about that all the time, will we see a cap on productivity eventually, you think? Or are we just going to see we'll double our work, triple our work, so on and so forth?
And it's a great broader question in terms of the history of economics and productivity and output relative to inputs, right? So when you think about what we've seen demonstrated clearly through the global economy over hundreds and hundreds of years is that technology innovation drives an increase in output. And that's because of productivity for sure, but it's also because we are really good as a species at coming up with more ideas. So if we automate something to a great extent, Most of the time, you're not going to see that we're just going to sit around, right? We're going to figure out something next. Like what's next after that? What's next after that? That's the story of the evolution of our species and beyond, right? So it's something that I wouldn't expect anything different to happen here. I think people are going to have a lot more free time, and they're going to figure out like how they can do more value-added new things. Like, and AI is moving fast, so AI is going to come up with new ideas as well. But I don't think there's any limit on productivity increases, because there will always be new things to go do. So productivity for a given static process, sure, you can optimize that all the way down to 0 hours. But in terms of like what happens to the time, where you optimize beyond that, there will always be new domains to go conquer.
Now, 40% of nonprofits did not have a single person in their organization educated in AI. And then 2/3 of the organizations in the report say that lack of familiarity with generative AI is a major barrier to adoption. But on the other hand, 3/4 of the nonprofits interviewed said that AI can transform their marketing strategies. What do you think is this disparity? Why do we see this?
People are, busy and fearful, right? Those are the two big things that slow people down. The busy side, I get, everyone's got a lot going on. The fearful side is just either not knowing where to start, not having a good place to go for some solid education to get started. Obviously, we're trying to help with that here, but that's a big part of it. Is people are overwhelmed and fearful. Fearful perhaps even of like making the wrong decision on where to start and going down the wrong path perhaps. And I always tell people there is no wrong path in terms of learning. As long as you start learning, it doesn't matter what you start learning. Start learning whatever you're interested in, and that will get you down a good path. But I think that the overwhelmed part and the busyness part is something people have more agency over than they give themselves credit for. If you think about what you do in the day or what you do over the course of a week, and you say to yourself, well, how much time would it take to be effective at using AI? And I always start with a very small number. When I speak to audiences, I say, at the end of this talk, I want you to do one thing for me, which is I want you to block off 15 minutes. It's 15 minutes in your calendar once a week, a recurring invite to yourself that is a non-negotiable piece of time where you're going to learn something about AI, right? Just do something new with AI that's going to expand your knowledge. And over the course of 50 weeks, you're going to have, roughly 12-ish, 13-ish hours of time where you've dedicated. You're going to know a lot more than someone who spent 0 hours of it. And of course, if you can do a half an hour, that's even better. And a lot of people say, okay, I can do 15 minutes. But in reality, actually, if you think about the amount of wasted time that exists in the world and the wasted time that exists in your organization, pointless meetings, projects that are frankly garbage, they are, but you just don't do anything about it, and you keep investing time into them. Part of what you have to think about is to stand up and say, what am I going to stop doing? Because that 15-minute example is cool and it's better than nothing. But what if you could spend 10 hours a week on AI work, right? Or 20 hours a week? And most people actually can, because their organizations, my favorite thing to pick on is like large systems implementations, right? We've talked about that here before. And, I talk about like AMS implementations or LMS implementations where people are like, oh, I got to go implement my AMS. And that's our big technology thing. All of 2024, we're going to invest a ton of money in it, a lot of time, and blah, 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 blah. And the reason we're doing it is because the current system is horrible and we hate it. It's really inefficient. And I always ask them, I said, okay, well, so in that scenario, if you're unbelievably successful, if your AMS implementation is an absolute home run, how much will it improve your productivity? What percentage will you get out of it? And they're like, oh, I don't know, maybe 10%, maybe 20%. No one really thinks the AMS replacement project is going to result in 100% improvement or 30% improvement even. They think it's just a small incremental change. They might think they need to do it, but like I always ask, well, what if you just did pause on that for 6 months and use the time, forget about the money, just use the time that you would have spent on a project like that to learn AI and do some AI experiments, small scale experiments. Where would you be as an organization? And I can almost guarantee you'd be further along as an organization and as individuals. So my point though, and of course those are like bold, types of things to say and think, and that's easier said than done. But I do think there's opportunity to stop doing things that are not producing outsized returns for you and for your organization, and invest that time with some of the AI learning. So coming back to the Google report, I think if, these nonprofits, and really, I don't think it's just nonprofits, it's organizations in general, thought more critically about what they could stop doing, even small chunks, they could solve that problem.
Something that's been sitting with me for a while, kind of heavily, is that prediction we talked about from Vinod Khosla about expertise being available to anyone and everyone with the help of AI at little to no cost in the very near future. And Amith, you mentioned you called associations expertise brokers. And so we talked about what happens to an association if expertise is available to anyone and everyone. And I talked a little bit about this at the Innovation Hub when speaking about Digital Now. AI is absolutely going to disrupt business models. And I guess in my mind, going on with what you're saying is, will that AMS upgrade kind of save you from your business model being disrupted? I don't know. I've never worked in an association, but I'm just putting that out there in terms of the hierarchy of thinking.
Most people would not argue that a new AMS would save their business model, or help them create a new business model. In fact, if anything, it's going to further calcify the business model they have, because what does a large scale system like that do? Well, it really, it basically puts in place technology to codify a process that they've built. Sometimes things like a pricing structure or the way they use certain business processes in events or in committee management or whatever. And that's the last thing you should be doing right now, is to further calcify your business processes with more technology to automate. It's probably not a great process, and probably not going to be the thing you need to do as your business process to serve in the future, to your point, Mallory. So I think it's the perfect time to hit pause, not just for the reasons I earlier mentioned, but to your point that you need to actually explore what your business model will be. And most associations truthfully don't know the answer to that. I don't think any of us really do.
All right. So in a way, we're speaking to the choir, because if someone's listening to the Sidecar Sync podcast right now, they probably are not the one person in their organization that's not educated on AI. But what can listeners of the Sidecar Sync do to get buy-in from their colleagues, from their leaders, from their staff?
I think you can share resources a little more proactively. I know that I've heard from listeners who have received the Sidecar Sync podcast from people who referred them. I've heard that a ton from the content that we do and webinars that we do. So I think there's people do that kind of passively. But I do think that you can become a bigger sharer of content where, whatever you're reading, listening, or watching, wherever it is, whether it's our stuff or anyone else's, just if you find something useful, get in the habit of more actively sharing it. Maybe create a Slack channel for sharing resources in your organization if you don't have one, or a Teams channel, or create a distribution group that you email to that people can sign up for, or just proactively email to people or text to people that you think should be getting it. For one thing, that'll actually, over time, if you do that enough, put you in a position as the knowledge expert in your organization, which is awesome in a lot of ways. But I think it's just people have to take a little more initiative to share stuff. If they're the ones receiving it, but not that many people in the organization are hearing it, you can take it upon yourself to be that change agent and to share it. Like every week, share one piece of content with one more person, right? If you did that consistently for 50 weeks, you've shared 50 pieces of content with potentially 50 different people, or even 50, some of the people being the same. That can have an impact. And if more people did that, you really start to make an impact, put a dent in that problem.
We have a Blue Cypress Microsoft Teams channel for AI things, and you'd be surprised. It's not always the same people posting. Sometimes there are new people posting from new companies about new tools. It's a really nice collaborative space to share ideas. Now, topic 3, Randy Travis, a renowned country music artist, made a comeback with a new song titled Where That Came From, thanks to AI. Travis has been unable to sing or speak effectively since suffering a stroke in 2013, which left him with severe aphasia and limited his ability to communicate. The process of recreating Travis's voice involved a collaborative effort with his longtime producer Kyle Lenning and the use of a surrogate voice provided by country singer James Dupree. Initially, Warner Music extracted vocal tracks from Travis's previous recordings and then used these tracks to train an AI model. This model was capable of generating a voice that closely resembled Travis's distinct vocal style. The project was definitely a technological advancement, but also had some emotional resonance as well. Mary Travis, Randy's wife, described the profound impact of hearing the song, noting that Randy experienced a wide range of emotions upon hearing his voice again, which was both surprising and deeply moving for him. This use of AI in music has sparked discussions about the ethical implications and the potential of AI to aid artists who face similar challenges. It also raises questions about the authenticity and the artistic integrity of using AI to recreate human artistic expressions. In Travis's case, the project has been seen as a heartfelt tribute to his legacy and a way to overcome the limitations imposed by his health condition. Amith, to me, this is the two-sided coin, right, of AI and everything, especially kind of AI and music. It's good on one hand, and then, we talked about this with the Suno episode. It's bad on the other hand, perhaps. What are your initial thoughts for this one?
Well, I was really moved by it. So I'm not like a Randy Travis super fan or anything, but I've enjoyed his music over the years. And I actually didn't know that he had a stroke, but I really never thought about it. But I realized I hadn't heard a new song for a long time. And so it was really tragic to hear, and at the same time, really exciting to know that, new music is something he could participate in creating again, even though he's unable to perform the song in the traditional way. So I think that's a really interesting creative outlet, that the expression of that creativity can still come from a person as talented as he is, even though he is physically unable to perform the song. So that's fantastic in terms of that, that modality being available. Obviously, a lot of resources went into this. This is not like Suno or Udio. It's like a professional grade AI model trained on a single artist. So it's pretty way, way, way better than something you get off of a consumer product for $9 a month. Although those tools are quite amazing. Actually, it's not at this level, obviously. But like with all things with AI, the technology gets faster and cheaper at a relentless and crazy fast pace. So that also means that this kind of targeted voice cloning of a particular artist could very easily be performed by any consumer very, very soon using open source tools that have no gating on them. So there's all sorts of havoc that can create. So to that flip side of the coin that you were describing, it's also deeply concerning. I think that, music and visual arts and acting and so many other forms of artistic expression are uniquely human forms of expression. And I love to see ways for them to thrive while AI continues to advance. I don't personally have an answer, but I'm torn by it, honestly. I think it's both incredibly impressive and in this particular case, an incredibly great use case for it, but also, kind of deepens the concern at the same time in terms of how good these tools are. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is really beautiful. I mean, I'm hearing about this. I think this is just a fantastic example of the good AI can do in the creative space. I mean, Randy Travis may have never sang again or had the opportunity to hear his voice with a new song, new lyrics. Surely he's been, writing and wanting to produce music. So I think on that hand, it's fantastic. But then, on the other hand, I think how long is it until everyone has access to this technology? And then from there, what are you going to do with it? I wanted to ask you, Amith, in thinking this through, it seems obvious, but I don't know if I've ever really thought this or given it a name in my head, but is this a pattern with all new technology? It comes out and we see so many good opportunities, but then there's always bad actors with the internet. I'm thinking with social media, probably other technology I'm not thinking about. Is this a typical pattern that we're going to see play out?
I mean, it's a classic dual use technology, and that means it's general purpose technology. It can be used for both incredibly good and incredibly bad things. You can use airplanes to deliver, organ transplants across the country. You can also use them to deliver nuclear bombs, right? So technologies tend to be, that are general in nature, tend to be usable for many different purposes. So I think it is a predictable scenario. I mean, the more powerful the technology is, the more extreme those examples become.
And with this specific technology, I know we talked about Suno and how that could be used for business, but do you see any, obviously this is much more advanced, do you see any kind of potential use cases for business with something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in the same general category of when we did the episode and talked about Suno. If you haven't caught that episode, we'll put a link in the show notes, but it was just a handful of episodes ago, and we, shared the whole song that we created for Sidecar. But I think, music is a modality for communication and expression. It's something that I think it opens a creative outlet that is unnatural in business, except for consumer brands that are used to creating jingles and commercials and stuff like that. But the ability to rapidly and easily and inexpensively create music to accompany a variety of things. Obviously, in the marketing realm, there's so many ideas that can come from this, right? When you think about creatives, the creative stuff that you want to put on a website or in social media, or personalized music you send to each prospect in a campaign, right? All these kinds of interesting ways of leveraging this technology. But I also think it's an interesting way to educate. And think about we as a species are wired to have incredible emotional recall of music, stories, because music in many ways is a form of storytelling. Not always, but there's an element of storytelling in many forms of music. And so we are wired biologically to be, storytelling creatures and story receiving creatures. And many books have been written on how marketers should do better jobs of telling stories, and how educators should use the storytelling paradigm as they're trying to educate people, whether it's in a classroom or a professional setting. And so I think there's tons of opportunity here. My wife's a great example. She remembers every single commercial jingle from the 1980s and 90s when she was growing up. So she'll just break out into song in the car sometimes and sing all sorts of things from stuff that I remember from when I was a kid. So it's super fun. But I don't think she'll remember the words that were spoken from those commercials, but the music you remember, right? So there's something to be thought about there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a random skill. She probably can't put that on a resume, but it's a neat one. I was thinking too, in terms of business, I was thinking about keynote speakers. I don't know, maybe training up a model of a keynote speaker, maybe that's no longer with us. And then maybe we'll have, Steve Jobs one day at Digital Now. That was at least one area that I was imagining.
Yeah, and that becomes an opportunity. There's opportunities for those that have departed. There's also in their estates and to license and stuff. Obviously, that's the assumption of proper licensing and so forth of that intellectual property effectively. But also, there's an opportunity to do that in the context of delivering content at scale that you couldn't do, with the actual physical distribution of your atoms, right? If you want to physically go from one location to another to speak. There's a limitation there. And, also there's other technologies that are around the corner in terms of virtual or mixed reality. There's the possibility of holographic projection at HD type of quality down the road and the not too distant future. All sorts of other interesting things that could bring all sorts of experiences that open up new aperture for communications and really new modalities for expression and communication. So I find it exciting. Again, I am an AI optimist through and through, but I also am looking at this with an eye for how can you watch out for this stuff, because the opportunity to get fooled is extremely high as well.
Yep. I think you can be an optimist and be a realist at the same time, or at least balance those. Well, I think this is the first time ever, maybe, we've talked about the intersection of country music and AI on the Sidecar Sync podcast. So I guess you never know what you're going to get in these episodes. And reminder to you all, if you enjoyed the episode, click the link, if you're listening on mobile, to send us fan mail. Amith and I would love to read it.
And share this with at least one person this week.
I love it. We'll see y'all next week.
Thanks for tuning in to Sidecar Sync this week. Looking to dive deeper? Download your free copy of our new book, Ascend, Unlocking the Power of AI for Associations at ascendbook.org. It's packed with insights to power your association's journey with AI. And remember, Sidecar is here with more resources from webinars to boot camps to help you stay ahead in the association world. We'll catch you in the next episode. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep disrupting.